What's up, you guys? Welcome to Star Wars The Clone Wars Retro Discussions. Today we're going to have a chat about Season 1, Episode 2, Rising Malevolence. Make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'll also leave a link in the description below for my other YouTube channel called Top 10 Character Moments. Make sure you guys subscribe there as well. Alright, without any further ado, intro guy, take it away. The Clone Starfleet is under siege. Dozens of Republic warships have been destroyed in merciless surprise attacks that leave no survivors. Rumors spread of a terrible new separatist weapon. In the face of growing fear, the Jedi Council sends Master Plo Koon to hunt down the menace before it strikes again. Thank you, intro guy, giving us a little bit of detail on what's going on at the start of this episode. This episode was directed by none other than our guy Dave Filoni and written by Stephen Melching. This is an episode that I remember when they were airing it on Cartoon Network, it was back to back along with the episode that we talked about last week called Ambush. Last week, it was very much about Yoda. It was about, three of the clones that we saw with him between Thyre, Jek, and Grease. And in this episode, ironically, it's about a different Jedi and three clones. That being Jedi Master Plo Koon, who you are going to hear a lot about in the Clone Wars, Commander Wolf, Sinker, and Boost. The episode starts out with Plo Koon, and like I said before, you guys, he is someone that you are going to hear about throughout the entirety of Clone Wars because Dave Filoni is a massive Plo Koon fan. He did nothing in the movies, but he did a heck of a lot in the Clone Wars. And I had no idea who Plo Koon was, if I'm being perfectly honest with y'all. Like, how old, again, I would have been like, 8 years old, 9 years old watching this show when it started, so I really had no clue who he was. Want to know who I did know, however? General Grievous, who we see aboard this massive separatist warship along with Count Dooku. Now, I know General Grievous from a few things up to this point, because as y'all remember perhaps from my Clone Wars movie discussion, when it came to Grievous, I was not able to watch Revenge of the Sith when, I was watching through the Star Wars movies at 6 years old or however old I was. I'd watched through the originals and I watched through 1 and 2. But because it was PG-13, my parents wouldn't let me watch it. Not right away, anyway. Like, I'm pretty sure I watched it when I was like 10 or 11, so I had to wait a couple years, but eventually I did see it. But the things I remember Grievous from are, first off, the Revenge of the Sith video game, because that was something the thing was, I never was able to beat the Revenge of the Sith video game because, I'd always get stuck on the Utapau levels. Maybe that's why I was able to play the game. Maybe, I don't know, my parents had confidence that I'd never beat the game or whatever. I don't know, but I would only ever be able to get past the levels with where you're on the flagship and you fight Count Dooku and all that, but that was pretty much it. But there was the DS version of the Revenge of the Sith video game, or not the DS, it was the Game Boy. And I'm thinking about it right now, you guys, it's all coming back to me. I do remember Revenge of the Sith through that game. So again, it was always one of those things where I had an idea of what was going on in Revenge of the Sith, but I never had actually seen it in full. I also would look up on StarWars.com, there'd be 10, 15 second clips that I would watch of stuff that would happen. And then of course there was the micro series where we really get to see General Grievous in his prime being a badass. It's through all of these things that I know General Grievous, and so when I see him for the first time in this series, it's oh, I know this guy. This guy's cool. This guy's crazy. As my intro guy put it, the Separatists are building a weapon. They've built a weapon that no one knows anything about. Plo Koon goes to hunt this weapon down, and it's all right, we've tracked the weapon to the Albergado system. We need reinforcements. And that's when he calls Anakin and Ahsoka. And Ahsoka says, Koto ya, Master Plo. Plo says it back, but he says, Kotu ya, little Soka. So already, based on that first bit of dialogue, it's clear that Ahsoka and Plo know each other from somewhere. Now, Anakin's all right, well, you know what, Plo, I'm gonna have to ask the Council because I was given strict orders to protect our staging area. Anakin, well-known person for following orders. But the transmission gets cut off because, of course, the Separatists jam their transmissions. And so Plo's all right, screw it, get ready for battle. And Dooku with the "you may fire when ready" line, which is the Tarkin line from A New Hope. And all of a sudden, this massive beam, gets shot out of the ship. and it disarms all of the Republic cruisers. It's basically a giant ion cannon. So it neutralizes everything. All the cannons start opening fire on the Venators, and Plo has to get everybody out into the escape pods. Meanwhile, the Jedi Council are having a meeting. Anakin says, look, this is going to be an important meeting, Ahsoka. Just remember to speak only when spoken to. And then fast forward a couple minutes later, she's like, wait, no, we can't do this. Just because there wasn't any survivors then doesn't mean that there's not going to be any this time. And so Anakin gets upset with her, like, after this meeting, because he's like, what you don't understand is Jedi protocol, or your place, my young Padawan, as Admiral Yularen walks into the room, probably thinking like, oh crap, what did I just walk into? Admiral Yularen, voiced by Tom Kane, who does all the intros for Clone Wars, also voices Yoda. We get Chancellor Palpatine in this episode as well, a part of this council meeting, voiced by Ian Abercrombie, who is just an absolute legend. But back to Plo Koon and our fellow clones in the escape pods. They obviously are without power, so they're trying to work on getting the power restored and trying to figure out like, all right, well, someone's gonna come for us, right? But meanwhile, we get Anakin and Ahsoka on the Twilight, and they're making their way to the Albergado system. And Ahsoka's like, oh, so it's okay when you don't follow what the council says. Remember, rule follower Anakin disobeys orders immediately. But I think what Anakin was trying to point out is like, the way that you went about saying what you said was wrong. Though at the same time, I don't think that Anakin is setting the best example either. However, I do agree with him in the sense that lives are in danger. You can't just turn your backs on that. Meanwhile, Plo and his boys, they're trying to get the pods back together. They see another pod out in the distance, but when Plo uses the Force to turn it around, all the troopers that are inside are revealed to be dead. Plo Koon has a lot of great moments in this episode, and again, I said it last week, I'm going to say it again this week. These episodes really planting the seeds for why you should care about the clones. Because at the start, you're maybe not going to get it. And I know I didn't, right? Because the clones, like, they didn't really have much personality in Attack of the Clones or in the Micro series. They're just soldiers that fight for the Republic. But what this show did was give them all their personalities and give them that individual way of thinking. And Plo saying like, look, I value your life more than finding that weapon. Because I think Sinker says, look, with all due respect, sir, strategically, it doesn't make any sense for someone to come look for us. If I was in command, I'd be hunting that weapon down. And that's where Plo says what he says. Plo has another crazy line though, where he says like, when you ask for trouble, you should not be surprised when it finds you. And so like eventually they get the pod working again, and then all of a sudden they're getting like a transmission coming through a very weak frequency. This is pod 1977. We're under attack. Is anyone out there? And Plo's like, that signal is weak. They must be close by. Sir, I've got visual contact. It's just like right next to him. And all the droids open, they're cut through the pod. All those clones get wiped out. One thing that I do want to bring up with this episode is there were a lot of added scenes. Well, maybe not a lot of added scenes, but some added scenes in this episode that you didn't get when this episode was aired on Cartoon Network. Like that moment with Obi-Wan and Cody on the Venator and them chatting with Yularen, that was never on when that episode first aired. It wasn't until they brought out the DVD of the episode and they put it on Disney Plus and everything where they added that stuff. Actually, I shouldn't give Disney Plus credit for that because, like, again, that was established way before Disney Plus. They just kept that version of it that they put on the DVDs. But eventually, Obi-Wan realizes that Anakin's gone, so he calls him, and the first thing he says, Anakin, where are you? Every time Obi-Wan contacts Anakin in this show so far, it's always something funny. Anakin, did you get shot down again? Yes. Good stuff. And then like some other added scenes that they'd add as well, like even just some shots of like the Twilight flying around or different shots during the battle between Plo and the battle droids. Just they would add certain things in this episode that they didn't do that for all the episodes, but I do specifically remember this episode. There were a lot of added in stuff that they added once they released the DVDs. Another thing that's always stuck with me in this show is the battle droid humming that one theme from Tatooine where it's like da 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 da. And every time I listen to that, because like I'd hear him hum that, and like me and my friends would always like find that funny in when we were little watching the show. But it wasn't until like I got older and I watched New Hope and I heard that and I went, hey, that's what the battle droid was singing. I was like dumbfounded by it. I was like, oh my gosh. During the battle when like the battle droid's like, time to put the squeeze on them, and he starts squeezing the pod. Eventually though, they, cause Ahsoka's sending a transmission through and like Wolf is barely getting it and Plo's just like, keep the signal alive, Commander. And so he sends Sinker over to take care of the rest of the battle droids. And he's just like, eat laser clankers, and he starts blasting them all. Plo cuts the pod loose of the boarding ship. Droid hunters crash into debris. He's just like, uh-oh, and then boom, he crashes. It's kind of that moment, right, where all hope kind of seems lost for Plo and the clones. The clones are just like, nah, this is it. I never believed anyone would come for us. And Plo reaches out into the Force. He's just sitting there thinking. And you start to see Ahsoka on the ship thinking clearly. And then she kind of like, her eyes wide open. And she's like, oh my gosh, I sense him. And I think it would also be a good time to go back and explain as well. They talk about why Ahsoka cares so much for Plo. Because Ahsoka's like, I have to believe that he's still alive. And Anakin's like, how do you know him anyway? And she says, he was one of my oldest friends. It was Master Plo Koon who found me and brought me to the temple. So it makes sense why she cares so much about him. And there is clearly that bond there because she sensed him when Anakin couldn't. And it kind of goes along with the cookie of this episode. You know, the thing that happens right before the Tom Kane intro. And the thing that was said on there was, belief is not a matter of choice, but of conviction. That idea of like caring so much about something, a belief in something, it's not something you can always explain at times, but it's just something that you know. And that was very much applied with this scene because Ahsoka, like, she pleads with Anakin, like, I know he's alive. I can sense it. And she like takes over the ship controls, like, I know he's there. And again, like, it's so funny, right? Because like Anakin's the chosen one. Anakin's the one who's supposed to have like all this untapped power and potential, but like he couldn't sense Plo Koon's presence, but Ahsoka could. Now, right before, again, Plo Koon has all the fucking great lines in this episode because he goes out there like, he's like, why are you so certain that no one is coming? And the clone says, we're just clones, sir. We're meant to be expendable. Plo goes, not to me. And I'm like, yeah, like every time I hear that now, I'm like, yes. It's like I have to say it along with him because every time when he says it, I'm like, no, you're not expendable. Not to me.
We're just clones, sir. We're meant to be expendable.
Not to me.
They rescue Plo, they rescue the clones. They have an actual medical droid on this ship, not the one who told them to see an actual doctor. It's probably why they got a real medical droid. It's like, all right, we can't deal with this hologram anymore. But then all of a sudden, the Malevolence is approaching upon them. And they're like, all right, we got to shut down all the power systems before they detect us. They shut down everything, including R2, except the medical droid. That's what gets them caught.
We're picking up a faint signal from a droid, not one of ours. They're right behind us.
Move us into attack position.
And Dooku's like, General, I don't want any witnesses. And that's been another big thing about this episode too, right? Is the Separatists have been, as Obi-Wan put it, unusually tidy. Because they don't want anybody knowing about this secret weapon of theirs. So far, it's left no survivors up until this point. They start flying away. Grievous orders the ship to fire. And this part of the episode just shows off how great of a pilot Anakin is. He's like dodging and weaving the debris. He's trying to avoid the ion beam. And eventually he gets out of it and they're able to make the jump to hyperspace. And so Grievous gets upset because he's like, now they're going to learn of our weapon. And I love how like all the droids just like stop and they all like look up at Dooku. Dooku then starts blaming Grievous like, it's your failure, General. This is most unfortunate. I will have to discuss this with my master.
Your failure is most unfortunate. I will have to discuss this with my master.
And I think one of the big things that they were worried about, right, is if there are any witnesses of this weapon, they'll be able to report it back to the Republic and they might be able to identify a weakness in it. I guess in a sense, it's very much like the Death Star, right? Like that was always like a top secret project. They make it back in one piece and Ahsoka and Anakin kind of have a nice moment at the end because Ahsoka's like, oh, you want me at the meeting? I figure because of last time. And Anakin kind of compliments her, but he does say, look, if I'm getting in trouble for this, you are going to share some of the blame too. She says, right beside you, Sky Guy. I think that line was changed too. I want to say that she said right beside you, Master, like the first time this episode aired. It was so long ago that like my memory of it is like, it's so hard to remember back to a lot of that stuff, but I want to say that the Sky Guy line was edited for later.
Let's go.
Right beside you, Master.
Let's go.
Right beside you, Master.
And yeah, that was the episode. Another good episode of the Clone Wars. I really liked this episode. Like, I loved it back then. I love it now. It's definitely like a good introduction into the Clone Wars, because like I said, the first 2 episodes of Clone Wars aired on Cartoon Network together, and it gives you like an idea for like who the center, like between Anakin and Ahsoka, who 2 of the essential characters in the show are. And you know, coming off the Clone Wars movie, it's like we get to see Ahsoka continue to learn under Anakin, and I guess he does kind of teach her a little bit, right? Like when it comes to, you know, doing what the Jedi Council says, that's one thing, but how we go about doing it, that's another. I think one of the things, you know, looking ahead with Ahsoka, right, is she becomes like, in a way, I think part of that rebellious side of her, or of like not wanting to do everything that the council says, is very much a thing that Anakin instills in her. And the reason she becomes so powerful, I think, is because of her relationship to Anakin. Because again, he is the chosen one. I think having Plo Koon and like even just standing there in the Clone Wars movie, because it was one of those moments, like I remember growing up as a kid, I'd watch that episode with Plo Koon where he was the main character, and I'd go back and watch the Clone Wars movie, and at the start of the movie I'd be like, oh hey, there's Plo Koon standing there, that's cool. And it's all because of this love that Dave had for Plo Koon, that he became a very beloved character in the Clone Wars. Like, because again, Plo was a character, right? It's like, I had no idea who he was at the start, right? Like, you could have pointed him out to me in the prequels, and I've been like, I have no idea who on earth this guy is. And I'm sure a lot of other people didn't either. At the end of the day, they took a character, right, who wasn't that well known, and now it's a character that if you watch the Clone Wars, you know damn well who Plo Koon is. So well done, Dave. Good job. And of course, George Lucas as well. So that's gonna wrap us up for this week, you guys. Thank you guys so much for checking out this retro discussion today. Thank you so much. Make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel, share this video with others to help support the channel. Stay tuned next week as we will be talking about Clone Wars Season 1, Episode 3, Shadow of the Malevolence. Once again, thank you guys, and I will see you next time.
We're just clones, sir. We're meant to be expendable.
Not to me.